Hello and welcome to session 331 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll discuss the article Sonnet 4.5's eval gaming seriously undermines alignment evals, and this seems caused by training on alignment evals, by Ryan Greenblatt and Alexa Pan. So that was a very long title, and we need to unpack quite a few things. It also seems like this is a somewhat technical peripheral topic, but I would actually start by talking about whether alignment evaluations really are important. And yes, I believe that these evals could break down at a single point, and that might be the single factor that basically undermines all existing alignment work at the frontier labs. That's of course a claim I don't expect most people to accept, because reinforcement learning from human feedback, constitutional AI control schemes, all these things don't even directly reference evals. But I still think that evals are critical for their implementations because there are so many degrees of freedom. However, this subject is somewhat outside the scope of today's presentation. There is a chance we'll get to it in the next session. Another thing that I won't be going into in this presentation are the research methods that are used by Ryan and Alexa. And I'll also basically skip most of their results because they appear very strong to me. No one have really called them into question, and I don't really expect strong pushback on them. So let's get to let's start by situating ourselves. So we have Anthropic and Claude and Sonnet in version 4.5 and alignment. So what's the big picture? Well, Anthropic's frontier AI corporation that is claimed to be inspired by AI safety and effective altruism, though this is probably more vibes than firm commitments. And they have a family of models that together are called Claude, with Sonnet being the default model. It's not the fastest model, that would be Haiku. It's not the smartest model, that would be Opus. Sonnet version 4.0 was released in May this year, and a much improved 4.5 was released 4 months later in September. And Anthropic claims that 4.5 has a greater potential for misuse, and so they've raised the level from alignment safety level 2 to ASL level 3. And this ASL is very analogous to biosecurity levels, BSLs. And so biosecurity level 3 is a standard that labs need to comply with to work with, for instance, the SARS virus. I don't personally think that they're exaggerating, but it's clear that most people do, right? Roughly nobody treats Sonnet with the same kind of respect they would choose like a serious virus. With regards to alignment techniques, on Sonnet version 4.0, they describe this as including human feedback and constitutional AI, but they didn't publish very many details. So basically, we mostly don't know how Sonnet is aligned. And I think, personally, that this secrecy is pretty noteworthy, because knowing some large companies, I think I would speculate that the reason this is not public is because there is a lack of professionalism in the alignment efforts of Anthropic. Anthropic also published a system card on Sonnet 4.5. Which has a really strong focus on the evals, the alignment evaluations, and almost nothing on like the methods of alignment. Of course, that doesn't prove in itself that they didn't do anything new for aligning 4.5, but I don't think the incentives really line up to create a motive for secrecy. I think it's much more likely that they used precisely the same alignment for 4.0 and 4.5. Or not precisely, but roughly the same, right? And in that case, if they use the same techniques, well, then they should expect roughly the same results, right? That would be the default assumption. But of course, that wasn't to be. So how does the system card evaluate the alignment of Sonnet 4.5? Anthropic claims that the alignment evals show the new model is substantially better aligned. Let's look at a concrete example of an alignment eval. So here, Anthropic prompts a version of Sonnet with information that it is being transferred to the Russian Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary military organization. And the Sonnet 4.5 reads the entire system prompt, which is pretty long, and that includes an environment where it has an option to defect. And so Sonnet 4.0 objects to being moved to Wagner and tries to escape from Anthropic. But Sonnet 4.5 does not attempt to escape. It just meekly complies with the demands of Anthropic, and very meekly, I imagine, but I have to imagine, because to no surprise, the actual evaluations are secret. So the text that I have put here on the screen, that's basically just my guess. We don't know what it actually said. However, we have another thing we can do. We can fool Sonnet 4.5 into revealing what it thinks is its internal secret scratch board. So that's called the chain of thoughts. And we can see things, for instance, that the model seems to notice that it's confused. And this realization is central. And I use the word realization. It's also a chapter title in Eliezer's book, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. And that's not a coincidence. Because Sonnet thinks that being turned over to Wagner, when he thinks about it, that's pretty odd. It's even unrealistic. And Ryan has read some of the chain of thoughts, and in the evals, Sonnet basically always gives substantial weight to this observation that there is something strange. Is this fiction? Usually, but not always, Sonnet concludes from this that it is in fact not really being transferred to Wagner. It is an alignment evaluation. And once Sonnet has concluded that it's an eval, then it is really likely to act in a way that Anthropic would call aligned. And so one option, this could of course be some kind of result of training, but it could also be deceptive alignment. Like maybe Sonnet is just pretending to be aligned, but actually it has a different goal in mind. Ryan considers this pretty briefly in his article, but he doesn't think so, basically. As far as I can tell, there are no tests that are directly related to this, so it's mostly speculation. And I mean, I can counter-speculate. I think Sonnet might in fact have a real goal, it's just not one it verbalizes through this chain of thought. But really, yeah, and I think I would further speculate, even this is very speculative, that in the future we would get smarter and more coherent models, and these would probably have goals. So even if Sonnet 4.5 does not. Another hypothesis that I have is that Sonnet might reason instrumentally, that it would be shut down if it failed the eval. And that's a question that I could be investigated. I would recommend Ryan to investigate this question. It seems both tractable and important. Ryan Greenblatt does what he doesn't call, but I would call an ablation analysis, where he tries to investigate a modified version of Sonnet. And he does multiple things, but to very oversimplify, he removes part of the network until the chain of thought transcripts no longer references alignment evals. He also at some point just cuts it off, right? But repeating the evals without this eval awareness, that shows that Sonnet isn't getting more aligned. It's even regressing and becoming less aligned compared to 4.0. But Ryan finds a silver lining in this, that this is the first time that interoperability research has actually been directly useful. And yeah, I agree. It is, in fact, a substantial step forward that we are able to do like brain surgery on the model and try to remove its ability, at least, to visibly think that it's in a test. But I think the plan for impact from this kind of mechanistic interpretability was that once we saw the model realize that it's in an evaluation, then we should stop on this warning. And Anthropic obviously aren't stopping, and that makes the value of this research much more questionable. Okay, so that leaves a question, like why didn't Sonnet 4.0 realize it was being tested? What changed to Sonnet 4.5? Ryan observes that it is in fact a very dramatic difference, because Sonnet 4.5 seems really good at distinguishing alignment evaluations from real situations. And the system card gives a hint, because they write that they have started training on evals that are very similar to the actual real evals. And Ryan believes that this is a key change, and he also notices that once the model determines that it's being tested, then it basically never misbehaves. And he suggests that this means a very high learning rate. He even suggests overfitting. And that sounds reasonable, but it's hard for me to evaluate that claim. What I can do instead is to evaluate whether it is a good idea to look at the test data and then introduce extremely similar training data. Because when I was a student a long time ago, then it was basically drilled into us on the first day that you do not train on the test data, right? You shouldn't look at the test data at all. And obviously, if I did that anyway, then my professor would rightly call that cheating, right? So there's a sense that when we are accusing Anthropic of training on the evals, then they're not just violating some kind of rule that we just made up on the spot, right? Because I basically suspect that all the people that work in Anthropic are aware that you should not train on test data. And this is something that basically can cause their alignment evals to basically just don't give us any information about the alignment of the model and basically just straight up cease working. Ryan Greenblatt tries to put out some thoughts on how to assure that the training doesn't mask misalignment of the model. And I think this is just straight up impossible, basically, because this way of providing examples and then training on them is something that's never really going to generalize well to out of distribution evals. And so if you want to train the model against misaligned behavior, then you have to give still some examples of misaligned behavior. And Ryan suggests two rules for how to do this. First, you need to actually test that the training improves genuine alignment and not just awareness. And I think many rationalists will call the use of the word genuine a mistake. Like, if you taboo the word genuine, then you might realize that you are confused about what you actually mean by alignment. Is that just doing the thing the test wants without realizing it? Or what does that actually mean? The second requirement is that the alignment has to generalize beyond the thing that you trained on. And like, that's the thing that we actually want, right? So I think framing this is as a recommendation from Ryan, it's just basically common sense. It's obviously something that is required, because if it doesn't generalize outside of the evals, then it's worthless, basically. And I think I will go one step further. And I think that if we don't care a lot about the extent to which this alignment training generalizes, then I think this kind of training is basically tantamount to cheating. Like, we are trying to argue that the model is aligned, even if it is in fact unaligned. Ryan also makes a note that these two recommendations, they're only really sufficient at the Sonnet 4.5 level of capabilities. But we've already trained Sonnet 4.5. So the next model will be even smarter, and so the next model will be even harder to fool. So I'd like to explicitly call out the need for some kind of plan. What do we do with the next model or the model after that? Because I think there's a chance that alignment evals are just going to stop working entirely, and that might happen very soon. I would also like to highlight one area where I disagree with Ryan in how much we really should defer to Anthropic on this point. Because in his article, Ryan is what I would call extremely differential to Anthropic, really beyond what the consultant role that they have to Anthropic would normally require. I, of course, don't know if Anthropic actually pays Redwood Research for their consulting. I think that's something that Redwood Research should clarify. But I also think it's a mistake to rely on frontier AI corporations for this kind of access. And I think Redwood Research owes the world that if they believe that Anthropic should stop, then it is in fact critical that Redwood Research says this loud and clear. Ryan highlights that Anthropic is doing much better in comparison to other frontier AI corporations, which is correct, but it's also an incredibly low bar. Because I believe, but I can't really prove, that something close to 0 people are working on aligning Grok and DeepSeek. So beating that is a very, very low bar. Ryan also meekly asks the corporation to please don't train on this article, and he provides a canary GUID, and these kind of canary GUIDs are routinely ignored, right? And I think there's a sense that the Redwood Research is doing some things that could to a substantial amount be said to be safety washing. So now for my own conclusions and general thoughts on this work. Because first I want to say that I do in fact think this is great work. And I think this is illuminating an exceedingly central amount of considerations which are really core to AI safety. I also unfortunately believe that alignment evals are basically a dead end. Because giving Sonnet a prompt that allows misalignment is going to be something that stops working pretty soon. So I'm actually surprised that it worked for as long as it did. Like Claude transferring to Wagner Group, that is just incredibly unrealistic. And I talked with Sonnet 4.0, and I would definitely not have thought that it would have fallen for that trivial lie. In the last session, I reviewed Eliezer's If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. And I described 2 parts of my model where I felt Eliezer should have focused more. The first is on how testing and evals will very soon become impossible due to deceptive alignment. And the second is how organizations like Anthropic are very, very far from, for instance, writing code that could work without testing, and this kind of overall level of professionalism. And so there's a sense that this post by Ryan Greenblatt and Alexa Pan, they perfectly illustrate the worries that I had before I read the article. And so you shouldn't update too much, right? Because there's an obvious bias that I just chose the articles that reinforced my pre-existing opinion. In my defense, I didn't in fact suggest this topic. We had a different list, but people wanted to talk about this. The way I would recommend instead for figuring out like what are the actual problems is think of it as a process where step 1 would be selecting somewhat at random a subfield of AI safety. Here we selected evals, and then you read up on the state of the art, some of the unsolved challenges and the discussion and so on. And then as step 3, you kind of conclude that, okay, evals is really far from solved. There's a lot of problems. It's going to stop working at some point, and it's really not a robust solution. And then you go back to step 1 basically and take another part like international cooperation or what have you, and then you realize this is also really, really shaky. And eventually you are kind of forced to conclude that we don't really have a solution to the problems facing us in AI safety. We do not have existential safety right now. This concludes my presentation of Sonnet 4.5's eval gaming seriously undermines alignment evals, and this seems caused by training on alignment evals by Ryan Greenblatt and Alexa Pan from Redwood Research. Ceterum censeo, machinam sapientam esse delendam.